If you are busy, you are really important.
The exhaustion culture.
Society has taught us all about the grind.
It's toxic.
The only destination this path leads is to burnout.
So 2010, let that garbage go.
If I can work hard enough,
well rested,
then I can make enough.
Balanced and well adjusted.
When I burn out, it won't matter.
Now that's sexy.
Hello and welcome to episode 94 of Truth Be Told. And so this month, our theme, we're talking about success and other lies we've been told. So last week we talked about exposing the lie of our productivity equals our self-worth. And so tonight, we're going to go a little bit further into another lie and this kind of umbrella of what success means. When we're going to expose the lie of exhaustion as a status symbol. Now, I don't know about you, but I have bought into this lie for a few years, and let's be honest, for a good portion of my life. This idea that I have to go, and give up myself and go here and there and be everything to everyone. And somehow, if I do that, then I will be worthy, or I'll be successful, or I'll be valuable. And so that really doesn't work. And, it's taken me a long time to really realize that. And over this last couple of years, I'm understanding more and more that I just have to let go of this idea of exhaustion as a status symbol. Because in the end, we're not going to get a medal for the person who went the hardest and did the most and was exhausted and gave all of themselves until there was nothing left. There's not going to be a medal at the end. I'm sorry to have to break it to you. But so we're going to explore this idea of letting go of exhaustion as a status symbol and letting go of this kind of old paradigm that we've been operating in and really begin to shift and focus into this new paradigm, this new way of being, this new way of living in the world, taking care of ourselves, letting our yes be yeses and let our no's be no, and really understanding that it's more about the being and less about the doing. So tonight, we're going to expose the lie of exhaustion as a status symbol. So as always, sit back and relax and enjoy this episode of Truth Be Told.
The lie this week is a big one. If you are busy, you are really important. If you are busy, you are obviously in demand. If you are busy, you are obviously successful. The lie this week is exposing the myth that is exhaustion as a status symbol. Society has taught us all about the grind or the hustle and has even made it a point of pride. Hitting the grind shows everyone else just how hard you are working. You're doing it, that you are being successful, as if to prove to others, or more likely ourselves, that we are doing all of the things we are supposed to be doing to be successful. That way, when we fail, it's not our fault, because look at all of the hard work we put in. Either way, working ourselves to the point of exhaustion lets the world remind us, you're busy, you must be working really hard, and I respect that. Which, ironically, ties right back into last week. If you are not being productive, you are not valuable. Or rather, I am productive, so I must be valuable, right? At least, that's what we are taught to believe, and for many of us, that is the running tape that we are trying to rewrite in our minds. So, a little history on exhaustion. As it turns out, exhaustion over the centuries has changed and shifted, maybe not how we experience it, but certainly how we have viewed exhaustion. 1,000 years ago, exhaustion was a lack of energy viewed as an illness. By the 7th century, exhaustion became a matter of faith. To be exhausted was to lack the faith or the ability to feel joy. By the 18th and 19th centuries, exhaustion was a sign of Excessive masturbation, obviously. By the 19th and into the 20th centuries, exhaustion became known as a symptom of tired nerves, what would probably be known today as depression. Industrialization and capitalism of the 19th century drastically changed living habits and the patterns of life. Work hours increased dramatically, and factory work became a major grind. Not even a century went by before doctors and psychologists stopped blaming exhaustion on the weakness of an individual and instead determined the cause to be society. Today, we find that exhaustion is an effect of busyness. And if you're busy, then obviously you must be successful. And the only destination this path leads is to burnout. The goal being that if I can work hard enough for long enough, then I can make enough that when I burn out, it won't matter. I'll have already made it. But wait, even if we were able to make all of the money in the world, there's got to be more to life than just wealth. Relationships, self-expression, belonging, the freedom to act and live as creative beings. Yet society tells us that this is it, wealth and productivity. More and more and more. Once you're successful, then you'll be enough. I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so that they can see that it's not the answer. Without even naming it, somehow we all know what the question is. We are told to chase the dream, success, and all that comes with it. Then, and only then, will you be fill in the blank. Happy, wealthy, free, in good relationships, whatever your answer. Yet there is evidence all around us that says success ain't it. Success is not the answer. It is not how we get the things we are after. Yet it can easily seem overwhelming trying to do it any different. How would we even try to go about doing it differently? One of the most universal numbing strategies is what I call crazy busy. The spiritual reality of it is busyness keeps us numb. Numb from facing the rut that we feel stuck in. Numb from feelings of less than and inadequacy. Numb from the potential overwhelm that is the system that tells us how it's supposed to be and the way that we fit into it, whether we like it or not. As cramping and unhealthy as it may be, exhaustion keeps us comfortable, too tired to change anything and feeling just important enough that maybe we don't want to. But there's got to be a better way, right?
If you haven't heard, our Thursday night event, The Gathering, is stellar. This is where folks come together, share their own personal life experiences, and have the opportunity to show up in new and authentic ways. So if this sounds like your jam, join us on Thursdays at 7 Eastern. You can sign up by flying over to our website, soulevolutioncollaborative.org, and the fun that we have is out of this world.
Well, I think it's fair to say that exhaustion as a status symbol, that idea, it's time to let that go. So let's look at, what's the opposite of that? Well, I want to start by, relating a couple stories from our history. Going way back to the Industrial Revolution, employees used to work 14, 16 hours a day for 6 days a week. And it was Henry Ford, amongst others back then, but he was the most notable, who started realizing that after about 40 hours of work, the employees' quality of work, the rate of accidents, all these different things were negatively affected. And so he implemented a 40-hour work week for his factory. Now let's look at one other example. This goes to World War II. There was a Thai manufacturing company in Denver, Colorado, that all their regular employees were shipped off to the war. And so training the new workforce, they realized after about 5 hours of work each day that the quality of the work really started to go downhill. So they asked the employees, what can we do to improve this? And they suggested, how about giving us just a break during the day to maybe have some coffee and just sit. And so that was the invention of the coffee break. Now, both of these things weren't given to employees out of the goodness of the heart of the employer. It was because they helped the bottom line. So that should be our example that exhaustion is not a good thing. So creating this, new way of being. So we talk a lot about, this shift in the collective consciousness, creating a new earth, a new way of being on this planet. So I think a big part of it is realizing this idea of exhaustion culture is outdated and it's toxic. It's so 2010. Let that garbage go. So creating a new way of being. I think about the quote that I heard this a long time ago and it resonated, and it is that intelligence is sexy. Well, let's realize this, that well-rested, balanced and well-adjusted people, now that's sexy. So what's this mean? Well, it means that we place value on our rest and rejuvenation. We take that focus off of how much we earn, what we produce, as being equivalent to our self-worth. We are human beings and we're here for a lot more than just chasing that almighty dollar. So as we move into this new way of being and value a new sense of what we are, kindness, compassion, empathy, equity, just lifting each other up in a new way of being. A big part of that is how we support each other in all endeavors of our life, especially in that idea of how we create our income for ourselves or for others. Whatever our role is in that, we would be wise to look at how the quality of everything goes down when we're out of balance. So that idea of exhaustion as being a good thing, it's really not. So as we move forward, let's embrace these ideas. And really we can look to other countries that are already implementing these ideas. Let's look to Iceland, who is working on that 4-hour four-day work week, and see how the results that they're seeing are very beneficial. All these different things, burnout, job satisfaction, all just employee retention, these kind of things all point to this idea that exhaustion, it's not sustainable. It's very toxic for most individuals. So this is our new way of being, and it's going to take all of us to pitch in and create the culture. And the crazy thing is that we all benefit when we do it. So the more people that hear this, the more people that wake up to this idea and start to implement it wherever they can, really, we will see a shift in all of society. It's important that we do this now.
Good stuff.
It is good stuff. There's a lot to think about.
Well, it is, and as we've been kind of pondering this topic this month so far, it pricks me because it is. I mean, a lot of I've bought into it as well. I mean, I think we all have, but I can only speak for myself. There's this constant this idea, if I do everything and be everything to everybody and give, even in spiritual communities, if I give, serve, then somehow I am that supports my value as a spiritual person, or my value, as a person in general, or my success or whatever. And man, that's exhausting.
Yeah.
And realizing that, no, that's kind of backwards. It's kind of ass backwards, isn't it? That so we're giving and serving from a space of not enough already. By doing that, we're already starting with this idea of not enough. And so then learning to kind of flip that and start already from a place of enough and worthiness and value, and then give and serve from that space. And I think that creates healthy interactions. It creates healthy communities. It creates just healthy relationships coming from that space. And that's not something that I've always done. So I'm learning with the rest of us. We're learning how to shift this, and so this is can be a little uncomfortable, at least for me, but really understanding the value and the truth in it.
Well, I think it's like it's a real live system. Like, I mean, I say system, but like we are in this way of being. Like the societal system that we all are a part of is very real and alive about all of this, right? Like a lot of the stuff we talk about, I think tends to be, things that we can do as individuals in our own life, and maybe the people around us, and maybe our small, like, close knit community kind of stuff. But like this month, the thing we're talking about is a part of this, like, nationwide, if not like global way and system, and it's like it almost it can feel like, it almost seems like we're like it can trap you, like you have to play along, I mean, like you have to have a job, you have to work, you have to, well, if you want a job, you're kind of, you got to do the grind of that job or whatever, like there's definitely ways where it really seems like we are in that thing, in that system. And what I think makes it really interesting, and you kind of touched on this, Ryan, is like how much our identities get caught up in that. Like the way we can wrap up our identity in exhaustion as a status symbol.
Yeah.
Like the role that Eckhart Tolle talks about this a lot, like the roles that we play, like the thing we've defined ourselves as, like a parent, or a teacher, or a this or that, whatever the titles and the roles and stuff. And most of those roles, exhaustion plays into really well. Like, can't you see how tired I am? Like, I'm exhausted because of all of this stuff I'm doing and carrying around. Like, can't you see that? How dare you ask me to do anything, or whatever, right? Like there's so many ways that plays out. But there's also like this, like, as much as so many of us don't like the system we're a part of and are looking for a new way to do that. And, we see that like out in the world around us where, nobody wants to work anymore, but really the reality of that is like nobody wants to be exploited anymore for your profit. I mean, like there's like quiet quitting, people who are just going to show up and do the bare minimum and not just totally stay out of the radar. I mean, there's all these things, right? All these things that make it seem pretty obvious, like we want done, like we want out. Let's create something new. And yet at the same time, all of us have been a part of this system our whole lives. So like we've defined ourselves by these things and as the way the system works. And like, I am the title here, so it's kind of crazy. Like the amount of interpersonal, inner journey stuff that would have to take place for all of that to happen without just like total chaos and emotional mayhem. And I don't know what else would happen, but like it is kind of crazy to think about the work that would have to be done, or the work I guess the work that is being done, right? Like, wasn't that half of the spiritual outcome of the pandemic was like being put in timeout and being thrust into this emotional journey for so many
people. And some people didn't like that. I didn't like it. I mean, for real. I mean, it's I had a hard time with it too.
I think there's definitely something there when you used the word exploit. Looking at, you have an entrepreneur who is proud about, I'm working 60, 70 hours a week to make my business work, which, one, they're exhausted, so they're not putting out their best stuff as it is. But then also they use that as a justification for talking to people that don't earn a living wage, and like, well, you just need to get out and work a second job. You need to go work 60, 70 hours a week at minimum wage in order to then you could get ahead too. I'm working 70 hours a week, you should also. And it,
you should just give up Starbucks for like 6 months and you'll be fine.
Yeah, that's like I do. Yeah. Don't buy your latte, or take a loan at your dad, as we've heard that people say. You know, it's just this big excuse, and like you mentioned in your segment that when it all collapses, which it's more than likely going to do, because people have this idea that picture themselves as like an Elon Musk, and kind of like hold themselves to that same kind of standard. And when you're exhausted and then everything falls apart, you could say, clearly it wasn't my fault because I was working very hard.
Yeah, I worked so hard, I'm exhausted. It had nothing to do with me.
Well, and for me, like when I look at this topic, it's and then, like I said, I can only speak for myself. And when I kind of look back at my own work history, as a social worker, like when I worked in hospice, I mean, working like 70 hours a week and just being exhausted. I was working holidays, I was working, in the middle of the night, I was all those sorts of things. And I got this kind of high from it, this kind of like this, like, oh, I'm somebody now, I'm something now, look at me.
Yeah.
And it's not that the work I wasn't doing wasn't from a space of love and compassion, but underneath it, there was that little whisper of, if you do this, you'll be good enough. Or if you can only give like this, then you'll be good enough. Or ignore your exhaustion and just push, push, push. And to the point where I literally could not go anymore. Like my body said, no, we're done. And it took that. I wish it had taken some sort of wonderful epiphany and spiritual awareness for me to understand my intrinsic worth and value, and then make this shift in such a beautiful way. No, it was like my body just physically could not go and give at that level anymore. And then it was like crash and burn. And then this has been this gradual unlearning over the past few years, and then moving from that sort of work into ministry, and a different sort of ministry, I should say. I have to be very careful not to take that baggage into this iteration of what it is mine to do in this moment. And so, and I'm learning that to begin to look at my own intrinsic worth and give from that space, like I said before. And it's a really different feeling, and it's a feeling I wish that I had come to sooner. But I guess it's kind of those things you have to go through, all of those experiences in order to come to that awareness. But for me, this topic just brings up all those worthiness things, those kind of existential questions. It's not so much for me. It was never so much for like making money or advancing in a job as far as promotions, but it was this kind of the seedy underbelly of this service, was this kind of hustling for my worth. And so now, like, doing it from a different space, it's different, and it's expansive. And then I can say, I can give when I have things to give, and then I can rejuvenate myself, and then I can give again, and then I can rejuvenate myself. And so it's an interesting learning process. I have not perfected it. About maybe 3% of the way, and there's never going to be an end to it. It's a constant journey, but it's an interesting learning, and to look back on how I've operated in shifting frameworks.
Yeah, one of the things that's always fascinated me about any sort of like personal inner work, spiritual journey, awareness, like whatever we call it, whatever angle we come to it from, I think the one thing that is always constant is the skill, like the coping mechanisms that we learn before we begin healing. Once we start to heal, like, because there's no finished, right? And I think we tend to think like we have to like make it to some marked point in our healing progress before we're like, all right, I'm moving on now, right?
Right.
But like literally the moment we start to mend whatever that thing was that kind of thrust us into those coping mechanisms, right? Like whatever the event was, as soon as we start to mend and heal that, the coping mechanisms like immediately flip into this skill. So like when we the coping mechanism is a skill plus like the story and the event and the people and the emotions and the charge and like all that stuff, right? When we remove those extraneous things from that skill, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that, when people talk about like our gift to the world, like what's your gift to the world? Like, what are you here for? Right. It's always like whatever that skill is, that's the thing. And so we can end up doing the same exact thing from a healed space, but it's so amazingly different. And that has always fascinated me, to see people like take that corner and like all of a sudden that skill is like a totally different thing. You could be doing the same type of work, maybe it's even the same exact work, however, like, but applying that skill like to life, it is just fascinating to me.
It's like the energy behind it. It's like an energy shift. I don't want to say motive, but it's kind of like that. It's like that.
Well, and
the energy that's behind it, it may be that it may be the thing.
Yeah.
Like you're saying.
Yeah.
But then somehow, what I noticed is that, what I realized my gifts were, my gifts of empathy and compassion and listening, those things have not changed.
Right.
But
right.
now here's the catch. Before, when I was operating in this sort of hustling for my worth, it was energy sucking when I was doing those things.
Yeah.
But now, the more I'm learning to do it from a different space, then it's energy giving. I actually feel energized when I'm giving from that space. And so I'm still doing the same things per se, like you say, the same gifts or the same things that we're bringing to the world or to the community around us. But for me, how I know the difference is when it's energy giving and not energy sucking.
And so isn't it fascinating then, this whole like exhaustion thing and this like, striving for success, the American dream, right? Like we're chasing this thing, and yet the dream itself, like the American dream, tells us we are chasing this thing that is outside of ourselves.
Yeah. It's
always this thing that's at the horizon, and we're chasing it and not realizing the horizon is moving. It's like it's floating above the horizon, and we're trying to get there, but it just keeps going.
And
until we realize that the thing we're really looking for, there's never an answer for outside of us. The answer is inside. And then for me, that's where the rejuvenation comes from. That's where the energizing comes from. Like when I'm doing the thing, the skill, the whatever it is, when I'm doing the thing from a place of like self-empowerment, it's like, oh man, I could do this all day. And then I got exhausted again and we come full circle. But
sorry, Chris. I didn't know.
No, go ahead.
No, I think too, it's really, this conversation, sometimes for myself, I have to kind of bring it down a little bit because we live in a very like real sort of system, a system where we, have to a system that we work or do things outside of our home or inside of our home that support our life, that pay for our food, or pay for our family, those sorts of things. And so I think that this conversation, it's really hard. It's like the system that we operate in. It's really hard to let go of this attachment of success being the money we make or the advancement in a job. But then the very real thing we can't bypass is that people do have to do that. I have to do that. Y'all, we all have to do that. And so it's interesting how do we balance that?
Well, it's funny that there's a question in the chat that just came up that kind of is asking that very thing.
Well, that's why I mentioned it, because I saw it.
Yeah, I love this question. This is great.
Yeah.
How do we give up the ego attachment to overworking when we don't see the money coming from less effort? Yeah.
If we could bottle that up, that answer.
Right? Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of facets to that question. One, I think to start that in spiritual avenues, spiritual communities, ego tends to get a really bad rap. Like there's like this, like the spiritual ego, and we're trying to cause like the death of the spiritual ego. And that may not be what's meant here, but I just feel like kind of clarify our terms a little bit, right? Like
That's a soapbox for you too.
oh, for sure. Yeah. Jumping from one to another one, right? But the ego, like when we really understand ego, most of the time when we're talking about ego in a spiritual community, usually we're actually talking about the id. We're actually talking about like that flight or fight mechanism. That's like, this is my my reaction to these things that come up that scare me and fear and blah 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 and all those other things, right? And then we think that because we have that, we're not spiritual enough. We're not doing it right. Like we have to kill off that thing. But like, what is the part of us that thinks we need to kill off that thing? Yeah, it's that thing. When we kind of recognize that and start to see what the ego really is and how it plays out, and the id and the super ego and how that all actually like plays out in our spiritual journey, the ego is always pointing us back to the thing that we are being called to look at. And so before, like in this question, like before we even get to the amount of effort or the money, we need to look at whatever the ego's attached, whatever we think the attachment is. What are we attached to? And that's the thing. The ego is our best arrow. Like it's our best navigator. It's our compass to like what is coming up. What are we being asked to look at? And so, whatever that perceived attachment is, that's the thing to look at and go like, oh, what am I attached to? And probably why. Like, why is there an attachment to that thing? Mm-hmm. My answer for the rest of this question is there are universal laws of abundance, and then there's very like human-made rules about like finances and money. And so for me, I think it's a matter of where do we each individually land on those human rules of money, and how much do we buy into them, and how much do we play along? Because we do live in a place, especially if you're in the United States, we live in a place where, especially right now, the system is not working for most people. And so, is it does it mean getting a new job, a different job, one that pays differently? Does it mean getting an extra, we do need to survive, right? Like there is surviving. And I think the more personal work we do, the more spiritual work we do, the more of the journey we're on, the more awareness we bring to ourselves in where we stand within those human laws. And if I ever figure that out, I'll let you know.
I guess we could bottle that shit up.
Yeah, for sure. But, I'm certainly more than open to someone else's take, because it's like, who knows?
But, I think for one, like this, depending on where we're coming from, it could be like a very kind of privileged, place to come from for one person compared to another. For somebody that's already working those two jobs,
yeah, right.
Working 60, 70 hours a week, and they're still just kind of, paycheck to paycheck. And it's kind of maybe a hard thing to say, like, yeah, well, you'll find that other job that's going to value you more and, pay you what you're worth. Well, it's hard to get out there and find another job when you're already working 60, 70 hours a week. Yeah. But I do think that there's options, and, you should be exploring them. And then kind of, I think really like this question, it's a big culture shift that we are moving towards. And so I think it takes all of us, from whatever level of privilege or lack of privilege, wherever we're at, that, doing what we can from where we're at. And so like really finding the companies that are making that shift out there, and trying to, how can I support that company, as opposed to like, buying my goods and services from this other company who's, union busting and trying to keep minimum wage, down, and, as part of it. And then also, I think it's talking about how, like in my segment, that the bottom line is, in some instances, moved to where we need things to go more. So as we see companies that really do value their employees' well-being, more and more companies that do that, um, as we start to see that it actually ends up making more money in the long run. When you look at like lack of turnover of employees, lack of need for recruitment and training, and that's a concept that's catching on more and more. But it's been kind of in the past. There's been such an abundance of workers that it just gets ignored because when people leave, it's like always weighing that fine line. How much to be paying and too much for job retention or lack of and training, and how much could we eliminate that if we just raised enough the wages just enough. But if we look back to a time when the middle class was really built, by sharing of the resources of the abundance that's coming, like that's the shift that I think we need to see in the future, is to recognize that's not, when you see like CEO pay that's 750 times the median workers pay, and it's kind of just ridiculous lack of proportion that's happened. So,
Well, and I think too, it's like that underlying, going back to this kind of existential sort of thing, it's that underlying that my worth is that, or that our worth is all of these things. Our success is determined by all these kind of arbitrary sort of benchmarks. But it gets down to like, what if all the what ifs, like if we could begin to shift and begin to see and operate from that space of worthiness already, how would that, just that one little awareness, one little shift, like how would that shift this whole conversation that we're having? Would it even? I think it would probably, because then our worth would not be something that we have to earn outside of ourselves, but instead it's within ourselves. It'd be interesting. For me, I'm like all about the existential questions about, like, but it's like that kind of deeper, like, I don't know, that just that underlying energy, that force that is moving, this system that we operate in.
Yeah.
And I think it's worthiness. I think it just, at the root of it is this trying to earn our worth or earn our value. And it's created this framework, and
and honestly, I mean, it is really hard to separate out those elements, the way we view those things about ourselves, from our work, from how we show up, like from how life views us.
Totally.
And especially when it seems like there isn't enough, like when all the extra effort and all the extra hours are put into working, and it's still like, not enough. Oh man, right? And isn't all of this really just like screaming at us that we need to start caring about each other again?
Yep.
I mean, that's really what like for me, that's what it all comes down to. Like, it can't be every single one of these people's fault or even problem. It can't even be their problem that somebody has created a job where they need to work 60 and 70 hours a week and can't. I mean, it needs to be where you're like 40 hours or less and can easily for like, how is that, like, if it's something you need to live, it should never be for profit. I mean, that's like, how insane is that? And it just comes down to like not giving a shit. Like, people just don't give a shit about other people. Like, I built this company all by myself, and here are my profits. Like, no, profits are ungiven wages. Like, it's not profits, it's exploit. Anyway, from one soapbox to the next, right? It's like, we need to get back to like all of this is the world being like, care for each other, please. Like, imagine if it wasn't up to every single one of those people, every single one of us as individuals, to all have to recreate the dream and all the pieces and somehow make all of the money and do all the things. It's like, that really just doesn't work. It never has. It's just gotten to the point where it's so exacerbated and so obvious that it's like,
I love that answer.
sigh of like, can we please just care about each other again, please?
Well, and I love that answer, and it's like, like it does start with like me. How am I caring for the people around me?
Yeah.
And then how are we caring for the people in our communities? Then how are we caring? And then it just, but yeah, I think I never had looked at it that way before. I mean, I had, but that really does kind of hit home in this moment when you said that it does. And so back to the value too. Like I see you and your value and your worth, not based on how much money you make for me or how hard you work for me. Because I've had people that have worked for me. I've been in charge of people, and their value is not based on, how many patients they saw in a day or how much money they made for the company. Their value is because they are people that have gifts and talents and things to offer the world. And, it's our job to uplift and support people in living their best self. And so it is that value. It's like seeing not only our own intrinsic value, but honoring and seeing that in each other, and then creating these support systems where, like you say, that we actually give a shit about people.
Yeah. What's crazy to me is that that everybody has all these gifts that are just out there being, that we're not able to receive because people are stuck in this system where they have to work so much. So, like the people that are really holding on to, that large amount of money at the cost of exploiting their workers, all these workers that have these amazing gifts that would be coming into the world and enriching everyone's life. Like they're stifled because they're stuck working. And the people that are, thinking that they're enriching their own lives by amassing, huge amounts of money, they're missing out themselves on, the art, the creativity, and just the beauty that would be there when we really do learn to take care of one another. I heard a thing a long time ago, and it's always stuck with me. And it was, something to the effect of, and when people are earning a living wage, working 40 hours a week, what do? And the answer was, well, they plant flowers. They make their neighborhoods beautiful. They have time to stop and do these things. And they do that with their families and with their neighbors. And they just create this community. Like that's the gift that is just waiting here for us to realize as soon as we recognize, like, we've gotten so out of balance on what success is and looks like. So make this cultural shift, and there's a beautiful world just waiting for us when we do.
Breathing all that in. Wow. Thank you so much for tuning into this conversation. More to come next week as we continue to explore this idea of success and other lies that we have believed. But before we go, I want to plug two quick things. One, O-Shift, Healing the Divide. See it right here? This is going to be awesome, this event. So O-Shift Healing the Divide is our virtual summit. Last year we had our first virtual summit to celebrate SEC's 1-year anniversary. So this year, celebrate the 2nd anniversary of Soul Evolution Collaborative. We are going to be holding a virtual summit November 14th through the 17th. Registration for this event is going to be coming in the next few weeks. It's going to be amazing. We're going to talk about these shifts, the shifts that we're talking about tonight. Like, how can we bridge the divide? How can we care for one another? How can we have conversation, be in conversation with one another and support one another, even when sometimes we're coming from different perspectives and different ways of looking at the world. So it's going to be an awesome event. Stay tuned for more information about how to register for that event. And our second Sunday experience. So every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. we gather and not only learn about some spiritual principles, but actually participate in experiences. How can we actually put these practices into practice in our lives and to really experience them with one another? So it's an awesome opportunity to get together, to love one another, to support one another, and to be in community with one another. So every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern. So I invite you to hop on in. You can hide if you want, or you can jump in and participate as much as you want. It's always a good time. So once again, we appreciate you tuning in tonight or tomorrow or whenever you're watching this. We so much appreciate this and all the opportunities for bringing this discussion to the world. So if we don't see you Thursday at the gathering, we'll see you next week. Have a great week.